The bullet had torn through Gideon Quinn's shoulder at dawn, and by the time the sun reached its merciless peak over the New Mexico territory, he was certain he would die somewhere in the scrubland between Chisholm Ranch and the unforgiving horizon. Blood soaked through his shirt in dark crimson blooms, and his horse had thrown him an hour back when a rattlesnake spooked her into a frenzy. Now he stumbled on foot, vision swimming, each step a negotiation between willpower and the body's inevitable surrender. The year was 1878, and men died alone in this country every day, their bones picked clean by vultures and their stories lost to the wind. Gideon had always figured he would meet his end in a saloon brawl, or perhaps at the end of a rope, given his tendency to bend the law when it suited him. Never like this, though, wandering delirious under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. He nearly missed the small cabin tucked into a grove of cottonwoods, camouflaged by the natural landscape, until he was almost upon it. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the heat, and through his fading consciousness, Gideon registered the neat rows of plants surrounding the structure, herbs and flowers he could not name. His knees buckled, and he fell hard against the wooden door, his good arm managing one weak knock before darkness pulled him under. Josephine Carter was grinding dried yarrow when she heard the sound. Living alone had taught her to be cautious, and she approached the door with a heavy iron poker gripped in one hand. What she found when she opened it was a man, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, crumpled on her threshold like a broken bird. Blood pooled beneath him, and his breathing came shallow and quick. She should have been afraid. A woman alone, 23 years old with no neighbors for miles, and a stranger bleeding out on her doorstep. But Josephine had not survived the past 3 years in this isolated spot by succumbing to fear. She had lost her father to consumption, and her mother to heartbreak shortly after, inheriting this small piece of land and the knowledge of healing herbs that had been passed down through her mother's family for generations. People called her strange, the lonely woman who talked to plants and kept to herself, who sold remedies in town once a month and otherwise remained hidden away like a secret. But she knew how to save a life. Josephine dropped the poker and knelt beside the stranger, her practiced hands already assessing the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was fortunate, but he had lost considerable blood. She could not move him alone. At 5 feet and 4 inches, she was small-boned and lean, while this man looked to weigh twice what she did, all muscle and sinew beneath blood-soaked clothing. "You will have to help me," she said, though she doubted he could hear. She slapped his cheek lightly. "Stay with me. I need you to stand." His eyes opened, just slits, and she found herself looking into hazel irises flecked with gold. He mumbled something incoherent, but when she hooked her arm under his good shoulder and pulled, he managed to get his legs under him. Together, they staggered into the cabin, and she guided him to her narrow bed in the corner. He collapsed onto it with a groan that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside. Josephine worked quickly, building up the fire and setting water to boil. She gathered her supplies with the efficiency of long practice. Clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, needle and thread, salves made from comfrey and calendula, dried yarrow for the bleeding. Her hands remained steady as she cut away his shirt, revealing a chest marked with old scars and new blood. This was not the first time someone had shot at him, she could tell that much. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, and even unconscious, he jerked and groaned. The entry and exit wounds were clean enough, but infection was always the real killer. She packed the holes with yarrow and applied pressure until the bleeding slowed to a seep, then covered everything with her calendula salve and bound his shoulder tightly with strips of clean linen. By the time she finished, evening had fallen. painting the cabin in shades of orange and gold. The stranger's fever had already started, his skin hot to the touch, his body fighting the trauma and blood loss. Josephine pulled a chair beside the bed and began the vigil she knew would last through the night. She bathed his face and neck with cool water, coaxed willow bark tea between his lips for the fever, and changed the dressing when blood seeped through. He thrashed and mumbled, caught in fever dreams. Sometimes he called out names she did not recognize. Sometimes he pleaded in a voice raw with anguish. She listened to fragments of his story pieced together from delirium. A cattle drive, a dispute over water rights, guns drawn in anger. Whether he had been in the right or the wrong, she could not tell, and she supposed it did not matter now. What mattered was keeping him alive. 3 days passed in this manner. Josephine neglected her garden, her preparations, everything but the man fighting for life in her bed. She learned the angles of his face during those long hours, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the surprising length of his eyelashes against fever-flushed cheeks. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, she admitted to herself, though she had long ago accepted that such observations were academic for a woman like her. Men did not court the strange herbalist who lived alone. They bought her remedies and made signs against evil behind her back, and that suited Josephine fine. Her heart had been broken once, years ago, by a banker's son who had courted her in secret and married a respectable girl in public. She had no intention of offering it up for breaking again. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Josephine dozed in her chair, exhausted from the sleepless nights, and woke to find the stranger watching her with clear, conscious eyes. "Am I dead?" His voice came out as a rasp, dry as the desert wind. "Not unless heaven looks like a one-room cabin in the middle of nowhere," Josephine replied, sitting up straight and reaching for the water pitcher. "Drink this, slowly." She helped him raise his head, and he drank like a man parched, water running down his stubbled chin. When he finished, he fell back against the pillow, breathing hard from even that small exertion. "You saved my life. I did what any decent person would do." She set the cup aside and checked his bandages. No fresh bleeding, no foul smell of infection. Relief washed through her, though she kept her expression neutral. "Where am I?" "About 10 miles north of Chisholm Ranch. I am Josephine Carter. This is my land. Gideon Quinn." He tried to shift and winced, his hand moving to his injured shoulder. "How long have I been here?" "4 days. You were shot. The bullet went through clean, but you lost a great deal of blood. Do you remember what happened?" His jaw tightened. "Water dispute. I was working for a rancher trying to fence off a creek that had always run free. Another outfit took exception to it. Things got heated. I tried to walk away, but someone decided to shoot first and talk never." "Were you alone?" "The others scattered when the shooting started. Smart men." A bitter smile crossed his face. "I should have been faster on the draw." "You should not have been drawing at all," Josephine said firmly. "Fighting over water that belongs to everyone, fencing off what should run free. This territory has enough violence without adding more." He studied her with those hazel eyes, and she felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that she had not properly brushed her hair in days, and her dress was stained with his blood. "You have strong opinions for someone who just met me." "I have lived here long enough to see what greed does to people. Water, land, cattle, it does not matter. Men kill each other over it and call it justified. You are not wrong." He closed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I needed the money. A man does what he must to survive." Josephine softened slightly. She understood necessity, the compromises survival demanded. "Rest now. We can discuss your moral failings when you are stronger." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Something to look forward to." Over the following days, Gideon slowly regained his strength. Josephine moved him from her bed to a pallet on the floor, reclaiming her own sleeping space, though she found herself missing the excuse to stay close through the night. She told herself it was merely the healer's instinct, the need to monitor her patient, but she was honest enough to admit she found his presence comforting. The cabin felt less empty with another person in it, even an injured cowboy with questionable employment history. She made him bone broth from a chicken she slaughtered, rich and nourishing, and watched with satisfaction as color returned to his face. He was a difficult patient at first, restless and frustrated with his weakness, but gradually he settled into the forced rest. Josephine kept him busy by having him sort dried herbs while sitting up, teaching him the difference between chamomile and feverfew, sage and horehound. "My mother tried to teach me plants once," Gideon said, crumbling dried peppermint between his fingers and breathing in the scent. "I was too wild to pay attention, wanted to be out running with the horses instead of learning women's work, or so I thought then." "And where is your mother now?" Josephine asked, grinding nettle root with her mortar and pestle. "Dead 10 years. Fever took her when I was 18, my father a year later in a mining accident. I have been drifting ever since, working where I could, never staying long in one place." "That sounds lonely." "It is." He looked up at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "But then I expect you know about lonely." Josephine's hand stilled. "What makes you say that? A woman living alone out here, no wedding ring, no neighbors. You either love solitude or you are hiding from something. Perhaps both." She resumed her grinding, the rhythmic motion soothing. "I am not good with people. They make me nervous, all their expectations and judgments. Plants are simpler. You give them what they need and they grow. You neglect them, they die. It is honest. People are not so different when you get down to it. People are infinitely more complicated." She poured the ground nettle into a jar and sealed it. "They say one thing and mean another. They make promises they do not keep. They choose respectability over genuine feeling." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her, and she saw Gideon's expression sharpen with interest. "Someone hurt you. That was a long time ago. I am over it. Are you?" She met his gaze, prepared to lie, but something in his eyes stopped her. He had shared his own losses, his own drifting loneliness. Perhaps honesty was fair exchange. His name was Thomas. "We courted in secret for 6 months. He said he loved me, that he would marry me. Then his father arranged a marriage to the mayor's daughter, and Thomas did not even have the courage to tell me himself. I heard about it in town, like everyone else, like I meant nothing at all. He was a coward and a fool. He was practical. I had nothing to offer, no dowry, no family name worth having, just herbs and strangeness. Seems to me herbs that can save a dying man are worth more than any dowry." Gideon shifted his position, still favoring his shoulder. "This Thomas, he did not deserve you. You do not even know me. I know you took in a bleeding stranger when you could have left him to die. I know you have sat up nights caring for someone who is nothing to you. I know you are intelligent and skilled and brave enough to live alone in country that would terrify most women. That is enough." Warmth spread through Josephine's chest, unfamiliar and frightening. She busied herself with tidying her workspace, needing something to do with her hands. "You are still recovering. The fever has made you sentimental." "My fever broke days ago, and I have never been sentimental in my life." He stood carefully, testing his balance. He was strong enough now to move around the cabin, though she still changed his bandages twice daily and made him drink her healing teas. "Josephine, look at me." She did, reluctantly, and found him closer than she expected. He had shaved that morning with her father's old razor, revealing the clean lines of his face, and he smelled of the lavender soap she had given him. Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Thank you," he said simply. "For my life, I will never forget what you did. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they would not have. You are remarkable." Before she could form a response, he swayed and she rushed forward to steady him. "Enough standing for today. You are still weak, even if you are too stubborn to admit it." He let her guide him back to his pallet, but his hand caught hers before she could pull away. His palm was warm, calloused from years of hard work, and his thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. "Gideon, I know. Too soon, too fast. But I needed you to know that I see you, really see you, and what I see is extraordinary." He released her hand, and Josephine retreated to the safety of her workspace, her heart pounding. This was dangerous. She had built her life around solitude, around protecting herself from the pain that came with caring for others. Gideon Quinn was a drifter, a man who had admitted himself that he never stayed in one place. In a few weeks, he would be healed and gone, and she would be alone again. She could not afford to hope for anything different. But over the next week, hope snuck in anyway, persistent as weeds through floorboards. Gideon grew stronger each day, graduating from sorting herbs to helping with small tasks around the cabin. He repaired a loose shutter that had banged in the wind for months. He chopped wood for her winter stores, working slowly and carefully to avoid straining his healing shoulder. He watched her tend her garden and asked questions that showed genuine interest, learning the properties of different plants, the right times for harvesting, the way she dried and preserved everything for the lean months. "Chamomile for sleep and digestion," he recited one afternoon, kneeling beside her in the garden. "Yarrow for bleeding and fever, calendula for wounds, comfrey for broken bones. You have been paying attention. I have a good teacher." He reached out to steady her as she stood, her knees stiff from kneeling. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and neither of them pulled away. They were standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could count the faint freckles across his nose that the sun had darkened. His hand still rested on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "Josephine," he said softly, and the way he spoke her name felt like a caress. "I need to tell you something," her breath caught. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words hung between them, impossible and inevitable. Josephine's first instinct was to pull away, to protect herself, to dismiss his feelings as gratitude or proximity or anything other than what he claimed. But she had spent too many years being honest with herself to lie now. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know the things that matter. I know you are kind and strong and brave. I know you sing to your plants when you think no one is listening. I know you take your coffee black and you cannot sleep when the moon is full. I know you have nightmares about your mother dying and you wake up crying. I know you deserve better than you have allowed yourself to believe. How do you know about the nightmares? I hear you sometimes from across the room. I want to come to you to comfort you, but I know I do not have that right." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Gideon, even if what you feel is real, what future could we have? You are a drifter. You said yourself you never stay in one place, and I cannot leave here. This is my home, my livelihood. People depend on my medicines. Then I will stay." "You do not mean that." "I have never meant anything more in my life." He took both her hands in his grip firm and sure. "I have been running for 10 years, Josephine, looking for something I could not name. I think I have finally found it. I have found home. With you. What about money? How would we live? I am strong. I am a hard worker. I can hire on with one of the ranches, honest work driving cattle or mending fences, or I can help you expand your herb business. You said people come from as far as Roswell for your remedies. We could grow more, sell more, build something together. We. The word resonated through her, terrifying and wonderful. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself she preferred it that way. But the truth was that these past weeks with Gideon had been the happiest she could remember. Waking to find him already stoking the fire, smiling at her over morning coffee, working in comfortable silence or easy conversation, the simple pleasure of another person's presence, of mattering to someone. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Thomas broke something in me. What if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake, that you were just grateful to be alive and confused it with love? That will not happen. You cannot know that. Then let me prove it. Give me a chance, Josephine. Let me stay and show you every day that I mean what I say. If 6 months from now you still doubt me, I will go. But I do not think you will. 6 months. Half a year to see if this fragile thing between them could survive the reality of daily life, of hardship and difficulty, and all the ways people disappointed each other. It seemed both impossibly long and far too short. "What if I fall in love with you too?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if you leave anyway?" "I will not leave. Not unless you send me away." Josephine searched his face, looking for any hint of dishonesty or doubt. She found only steady conviction, the same determination that had kept him alive through blood loss and fever. Gideon Quinn was many things, she sensed, but he was not a liar. "I am difficult to live with," she warned. "I get absorbed in my work and forget to eat. I have strong opinions about things most people do not care about. I talk to myself and my plants. I am not sweet or biddable or any of the things women are supposed to be. Good. I have no use for sweet or biddable. I want you exactly as you are." The last of her resistance crumbled. "Then stay." His smile was like sunrise, brilliant and transformative. He pulled her close, mindful of his healing shoulder, and rested his forehead against hers. They stood that way for a long moment, breathing the same air, adjusting to this new reality they had chosen. "Can I kiss you?" Gideon asked, and the fact that he asked, that he did not simply take, made Josephine's answer easy. "Yes." He kissed her softly, reverently, as though she were precious and fragile. But Josephine had not been fragile in years, and she pressed closer, deepening the kiss, pouring all her loneliness and longing and desperate hope into it. Gideon made a sound low in his throat and gathered her tighter, and for the first time since her parents died, Josephine felt truly safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon laughed. "I should get shot more often. Do not even joke about that." She swatted his chest lightly. "I cannot go through that again. Then I will do my very best to avoid bullets from now on. See that you do." They went inside as the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of crimson and gold. Josephine made dinner while Gideon set the table, and they ate together in companionable silence. It felt natural, domestic, like something they had done 1,000 times before. After dinner, they sat outside on the small porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Tell me about your parents," Gideon said, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how quickly she had grown accustomed to his touch. "My father was a teacher back in Missouri," Josephine said. "He met my mother when she was selling herbs at the market. Her family thought she was marrying beneath her, that she should have chosen someone wealthier, but she loved him. They came west together after the war, looking for a fresh start. My father taught me to read and write and think for myself. My mother taught me everything about plants and healing. They were so in love, even after 20 years of marriage. When my father got sick, my mother nursed him for 6 months. She barely slept, barely ate. After he died, she just faded away. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she died of a broken heart. That must have been terrifying, losing them both so close together. I was 20 years old and completely alone. I thought about going back to Missouri to my mother's family, but they had cut her off when she married my father. I had nothing and no one, so I stayed here and tried to make a life from what they had taught me. You have done more than that. You have built something remarkable. Some days it does not feel like enough. Some days the loneliness is crushing. You are not alone anymore. She turned to look at him, this man who had stumbled into her life bleeding and half dead, who had somehow become essential to her happiness in the space of a few weeks. No, I suppose I am not. They stayed up late talking, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's histories and hurts and small joys. Josephine learned that Gideon had wanted to be a veterinarian when he was young, that he loved horses with a passion that bordered on reverence. She learned that he could play the harmonica, and that his favorite food was apple pie, and that he was terrified of deep water because he had nearly drowned as a child. Gideon learned that Josephine could recite entire passages from Shakespeare, that her mother had read to her every night until she was 12. He learned that she had a scar on her knee from falling out of a tree, that she preferred summer to winter, that she dreamed sometimes of traveling to see the ocean though she knew she probably never would. The intimacy of it was intoxicating, this exchange of truths and vulnerabilities. By the time they finally retreated inside to sleep, Josephine felt as though she had known Gideon for years instead of weeks. The next morning, she woke to find him already up, attempting to make coffee with limited success. She laughed at his sheepish expression and took over, and they worked together to make breakfast. It was the first of many such mornings, a rhythm they fell into as naturally as breathing. Over the following weeks, Gideon grew stronger. His shoulder healed well, the scars fading to thin white lines. He rode into Chisholm Ranch with Josephine when she went to sell her remedies, and hired on with John Chisholm himself, one of the most powerful ranchers in the territory. The work was honest and the pay fair, and Gideon took to it with the dedication he brought to everything. He left before dawn and returned at dusk, exhausted but satisfied. Josephine would have dinner waiting and they would eat together, sharing the details of their days. She told him about the new batch of salve she had made, the customer who came seeking a remedy for her husband's rheumatism, the hawk that had been hunting mice in her garden. He told her about the cattle drive they were planning, the young horse he was training, the endless work of maintaining fences and water sources. On his days off, Gideon helped Josephine expand her garden. They cleared new ground together, built raised beds, planted seeds. He had a knack for the work, she discovered, patient and careful with the delicate plants. Under their combined efforts, the garden flourished, producing more than Josephine had ever managed alone. "We should build a proper greenhouse," Gideon said one Sunday afternoon, surveying their work with satisfaction. "Somewhere you could grow year-round, extend the growing season. I could do most of the construction myself, maybe hire help for the heavy timber work." "That would be expensive," Josephine said, though the idea thrilled her. "It would be an investment. You could double your production, maybe triple it. We could sell to towns further away, build a real business." There was that word again, binding them together, creating a shared future. Josephine looked at Gideon, at the man who had somehow become her partner in every sense of the word, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she had been afraid to name. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Gideon's face transformed, joy lighting his features. "Say that again." "I love you, Gideon Quinn." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spun her around until she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, deeply, until she forgot where she ended and he began. "I love you too," he said against her lips. So much it scares me sometimes. We are quite a pair, both of us scared. We are, but we are scared together. That has to count for something. As summer gave way to autumn, their relationship deepened and solidified. Gideon moved his things into the cabin officially, though he had been sleeping there for months. They made plans for the future, talking late into the night about the greenhouse, about expanding the herb business, about the life they were building together. One evening in October, as the air turned crisp and the cottonwoods blazed gold, Gideon came home carrying a small wooden box. Josephine looked up from her mortar and pestle, curiosity piqued. "What is that?" "Open it and see." Inside the box, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a simple gold ring, not fancy or expensive but beautiful in its straightforward honesty. Josephine's breath caught. "Josephine Carter," Gideon said, kneeling beside her chair. "I know we have not known each other long by some people's standards, but I know my own heart and I know it belongs to you. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them back, wanting to see his face clearly for this moment. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Maybe it had been. Maybe everything in her life had been leading to this moment, to this man, to this happiness she had stopped believing she deserved. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in the parlor of John Chisholm's ranch house. Chisholm himself gave Josephine away, and several of Gideon's fellow cowboys attended, along with some of Josephine's customers from town. It was small and quiet and perfect, exactly what they both wanted. Josephine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of herbs from her garden. Lavender for devotion, rosemary for remembrance, yarrow for everlasting love. Gideon wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back, his hazel eyes bright with emotion as he watched her approach. The circuit preacher who served the area performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Someone had brought a fiddle and they danced in the evening light, Gideon holding Josephine close as they swayed to the music. She felt light as air, buoyed by happiness and the sheer impossibility of her good fortune. "Mrs. Quinn," Gideon murmured against her hair. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Josephine admitted. She had never thought she would marry, had convinced herself she preferred independence. But this did not feel like losing herself. It felt like becoming more complete, like finding the piece she had not known was missing. They spent their wedding night in the cabin that was now truly theirs, and Josephine discovered that the physical expression of love could be as tender and beautiful as every other aspect of what she and Gideon shared. He was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs and her nervousness, and by the time dawn painted the sky pink, she felt transformed, cherished, whole. The years that followed were good ones, marked by hard work and simple pleasures. True to his word, Gideon built Josephine her greenhouse, a sturdy structure with glass windows salvaged from an abandoned hotel in Lincoln. She filled it with plants, creating a green sanctuary where things could grow even in the depths of winter. The business expanded as they had hoped. Josephine's remedies became known throughout the territory, sought after for their quality and effectiveness. She taught Gideon everything she knew, and he proved an apt student, eventually becoming as skilled at preparing medicines as she was. Together they developed new formulations, experimented with different plant combinations, built a reputation that brought customers from as far away as Santa Fe. Money came more easily than it ever had when Josephine lived alone. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable. Gideon continued working for Chisholm during the busy seasons, and the combined income allowed them to improve the property, to save for the future, to live without the constant anxiety of poverty. But more than financial security, they had happiness. Real, deep, enduring happiness. Josephine learned that living with someone did not mean losing herself. Gideon encouraged her work, supported her ambitions, never tried to diminish or control her. They argued sometimes, as all couples did, but they learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to choose understanding over pride. On their second anniversary, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had helped deliver babies for other women, had prepared tonics to ease pregnancy discomforts, but carrying a child herself was different. So much could go wrong. Her own mother had lost 2 babies before Josephine was born, and the memory haunted her. Gideon was thrilled and terrified in equal measure. He became even more protective, wanting to do everything for her, until Josephine finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not fragile. "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I know you are strong and capable, but I cannot help wanting to take care of you. If anything happened to you or the baby, I would not survive it." His raw honesty disarmed her anger. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We will take care of each other, all 3 of us." The pregnancy progressed normally. Josephine continued her work, though she let Gideon take over the heavier tasks. She made preparations, sewing tiny gowns and blankets, stocking up on the herbs she would need for delivery and recovery. As her belly swelled, so did her anticipation and fear. Gideon was wonderful throughout, patient with her mood swings and midnight cravings, rubbing her aching feet and back without complaint. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice soothing, and talked to the baby through her skin, telling their child stories about horses and stars and the mother it would soon meet. In June of 1880, on a night when the moon hung full and bright, Josephine went into labor. Gideon sent for the midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in Lincoln County. But it was a long ride, and the baby was not inclined to wait. Josephine labored through the night, Gideon at her side, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths. The pain was tremendous, worse than anything she had imagined, waves of agony that left her breathless and crying. But between contractions, Gideon's presence steadied her, his calm voice talking her through each surge. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. You saved my life, remember, you can do anything." Mrs. Henderson arrived just before dawn, bustling and efficient, and took over with practiced ease. She checked Josephine's progress and nodded with satisfaction. "Almost there, dear. One more good push, I think." Josephine gathered her remaining strength and bore down with everything she had. The baby slid free in a rush, and Mrs. Henderson caught the tiny, squalling creature with expert hands. "A boy," she announced, quickly clearing the infant's airways and wrapping him in a clean blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the baby on Josephine's chest, and Josephine looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and overwhelming love. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being born, but perfect. Dark hair plastered to his small head, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving in indignation. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." Gideon leaned over them both, his own eyes wet, and touched the baby's impossibly small hand with one finger. The infant grasped it immediately, holding on with surprising strength, and Gideon made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "You are amazing. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for him, for this, for everything." They named him James after Gideon's father, and he changed everything. The cabin that had felt spacious for two adults suddenly seemed crowded with the addition of one tiny person and all the attendant chaos. There were sleepless nights and endless diapers, moments of bone-deep exhaustion and frustration. But there was also joy, so much joy. The first time James smiled at them, the day he rolled over on his own, his delighted laughter when Gideon tickled his feet, the way he nursed contentedly in Josephine's arms, his small hand resting against her skin. Gideon was a devoted father, doting and attentive. He fashioned toys from wood and played endless games of peek-a-boo. He walked the floor with James during colicky nights, singing off-key lullabies until the baby finally settled. He changed diapers without complaint and bathed his son with infinite gentleness. Watching him, Josephine fell in love all over again. This was the man who had stumbled onto her doorstep bleeding and half dead, and now he cradled their son with such tenderness it made her heart ache. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Ruth, after Josephine's mother. Ruth was easier than James had been, a placid baby who ate well and slept through the night almost from the start. She had Gideon's hazel eyes and Josephine's dark hair, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment of her birth. "I am outnumbered," Gideon complained, though his smile belied any real concern. 3 against 1. How is a man supposed to stand a chance? By surrendering gracefully, Josephine suggested, bouncing Ruth on her hip while James clung to her skirts. Life was full and busy and occasionally overwhelming, but it was good. Better than Josephine had ever imagined possible in those lonely years before Gideon. The herb business continued to thrive, adapted now to accommodate children. James and Ruth grew up surrounded by plants, learning their names and uses almost as early as they learned to talk. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper workspace for the medicines. The greenhouse produced year-round, and they hired a young woman from town to help with the growing business. Money was no longer a concern. They were prosperous, respected in the community, their past strangeness forgotten or forgiven. But more than success, they had each other. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Gideon and Josephine would sit on the porch as they had in those early days, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Gideon's arm around her shoulders, Josephine's head resting against his chest. "You ever regret it?" she asked one such evening when they had been married 7 years. "Staying here, giving up the wandering life?" "Not for a single moment," Gideon said firmly. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. You, the children, the home we have built. I was lost before I found you, Josephine. You saved me in more ways than just healing that bullet wound. You saved me too. I did not realize how lonely I was until I had you." He kissed the top of her head. "We saved each other then." As the years passed, their family grew more deeply rooted in the community. Gideon became foreman for John Chisholm's operation, a position of trust and responsibility. Josephine's remedies were sought throughout New Mexico territory, and she began training apprentices, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Ruth was his opposite, wild and adventurous, always climbing trees or chasing after her father's horses. They were close despite their differences, best friends and constant companions. A third child arrived when James was 8 and Ruth was 6, another boy they named Samuel. He was the most like Gideon in temperament, easy-going and friendly, making everyone around him smile. The cabin rang with laughter and the chaos of 3 children, and Josephine sometimes marveled at the fullness of her life. She thought often of that day Gideon had collapsed on her doorstep, dying from a bullet wound, a stranger she had every reason to fear. What if she had turned him away? What if she had let fear rule her heart? She would have missed all of this, every precious moment. The thought was unbearable. One evening, when they had been married 15 years and their eldest was preparing to attend school in Roswell, Josephine and Gideon sat on their porch as the sun set. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after the demands of the day. "Do you remember the night you told me you were falling in love with me?" Josephine asked, leaning against his shoulder. They were older now, both in their late 30s, marked by time and labor but still strong, still devoted to each other. "In the garden. How could I forget? I was terrified you would reject me. I was terrified to believe you. It seemed too good to be true that you could love me. I have loved you from almost the first moment I woke up and saw you watching over me. You looked like an angel, though you would hate me saying so." She laughed. "I would. I am many things, but angelic is not among them. Maybe not angelic, but certainly heavenly to me." He tightened his arm around her. "You have given me everything, Josephine. A home, a family, a purpose. I spent 10 years wandering, thinking I was free, but I was just lost. You gave me direction." "We gave each other direction," she corrected. "I was just as lost, hiding out here alone, convinced I did not need anyone. You taught me that needing someone is not weakness. It is the most human thing we can do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and stars emerge. From inside the cabin came the sounds of their children preparing for bed, Samuel's laughter, Ruth's protest about something, James's patient voice mediating as always. "We did well," Gideon said quietly. "Did we not? With all of this, we did better than well. We built something beautiful. We did it together." "Together," Josephine echoed, and the word held all the weight of their years, all the challenges overcome and joys shared, all the ordinary miracles of their daily life. Later that night, lying in bed with Gideon's arm around her waist, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. If someone had told her at 23, alone and lonely and convinced love was not meant for women like her, that she would end up married to a former drifter with 3 beautiful children and a thriving business, she would not have believed them. But life, she had learned, had a way of surprising you. Sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes salvation wore the face of a stranger bleeding on your doorstep. Sometimes love arrived not with fanfare and grand gestures, but quietly, in the patient growing of trust and respect and genuine affection. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. They weathered droughts and hard winters, illness and injury, the normal trials of life. James went off to school and came back with dreams of becoming a doctor, inspired by his mother's healing work. Ruth remained wild and free, learning to break horses alongside her father, refusing every boy who tried to court her because none of them measured up to Gideon. Samuel, the youngest, showed an aptitude for plants that rivaled Josephine's own. By the time he was 12, he could identify every herb in the greenhouse and prepare basic remedies. He had gentle hands and infinite patience, perfect qualities for a healer. Gideon's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines appeared around Josephine's eyes, marks of time and laughter and the weight of responsibility. But they remained devoted to each other, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. On their 20th anniversary, Gideon arranged a rare evening alone, sending the children to stay with friends. He cooked dinner himself, a somewhat disastrous attempt at the chicken and dumplings Josephine loved, and they ate by candlelight at the table he had built their first year of marriage. 20 years, Josephine said, shaking her head in wonder. It seems impossible. Best 20 years of my life, Gideon said, though I hope we have at least 20 more ahead of us. At least, she agreed. After dinner, he presented her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with blank pages. For recording your remedies, he explained. So the knowledge is not lost. I know you have been training apprentices, but I thought it would be good to have everything written down. Your mother's recipes, your own discoveries, all of it preserved. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. It was a thoughtful gift, perfect in its understanding of what mattered to her. Thank you. I will start tomorrow. Actually, I was hoping you would start tonight. The first entry should be about how we met. Why? Because I want our grandchildren to know the story. I want them to understand that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. That bullet that nearly killed me brought me to you, and I would not change a moment of it. So Josephine began the journal that night, sitting at the table with Gideon watching, and wrote the story of how a lonely herbalist had saved a wounded cowboy's life and gained her own salvation in the process. She wrote about the fear and the hope, the slow building of trust, the moment she realized she loved him. She wrote about their wedding and the birth of their children, the business they built together, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. The journal became her project over the following months. She filled it with remedies and stories, practical knowledge and personal history, creating a legacy for future generations. Sometimes the children would read over her shoulder, asking questions about the early days, about the grandfather and grandmother they had never met, about how their parents had fallen in love. James, preparing to leave for medical school, was particularly interested. You saved Father's life, he said, reading about those first desperate days. Did you know right away that you loved him? No, Josephine admitted. Love takes time usually. It is not like the storybooks where people fall in love at first sight. Real love grows slowly, built on shared experience and mutual respect and choosing each other every day. Is that what you and Father have? Choosing each other every day? Exactly that. Some days are easy, some are hard, but we wake up every morning and choose to be together to support each other to build this life as partners. That is what makes it last. Ruth, practical as always, asked different questions. What if Father had not loved you back? What would you have done? I would have survived, Josephine said. I survived before I met him, and I would have survived after. But I am grateful every day that I did not have to. He chose me, and I chose him, and we chose this life together. Samuel, youngest and most romantic, simply declared, I want to love someone like that when I grow up. You will, Josephine assured him. When the time is right, you will find someone who sees you for who you truly are and loves you anyway, maybe even because of who you are. The children grew, as children do. James went to medical school in St. Louis and came back a doctor, setting up practice in Chisholm Ranch. He married a teacher named Margaret, and they gave Gideon and Josephine their first grandchildren, twin girls with Margaret's red hair and James's serious eyes. Ruth, after rejecting countless suitors, finally met her match in a quiet veterinarian who treated animals with the same reverence Gideon did. She married at 25 and continued working with horses, eventually building a breeding operation that became known throughout the territory. Samuel took over the herb business when Josephine's hands became too stiff with arthritis to do the delicate work of preparing medicines. He had inherited her gift and added his own innovations, creating new remedies and expanding the business even further. Gideon and Josephine grew old together, their hair silver, their hands gnarled with age, but their devotion unchanged. They spent their days tending a smaller garden now, playing with grandchildren, watching the legacy they had built continue to flourish. One evening, sitting on the porch that had been witness to so many of their important moments, Gideon took Josephine's hand. They were both in their 60s now, slowed by age but still sharp, still engaged with life. "You ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When I showed up on your doorstep more dead than alive." "All the time," Josephine admitted. "I think about how easily I could have turned you away, how different my life would have been. Better or worse, immeasurably worse. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Gideon Quinn. Even when I am old and creaky and cannot remember where I put my hat," she laughed. "Even then, especially then." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I have loved you for over 30 years, Josephine. I will love you for 30 more if God gives us that long, and for whatever comes after that. That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. I am a romantic man. You just bring it out in me." They sat together as the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Around them, the life they had built hummed with quiet activity. Grandchildren played in the yard. Their children prepared dinner in the expanded house that had grown from that original small cabin. The greenhouse stood strong and productive, a monument to their partnership and hard work. This was happiness, Josephine thought. Not the dramatic, passionate intensity of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. The comfortable intimacy of two people who had chosen each other every day for decades, who had weathered every storm together and emerged stronger. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Gideon helped Josephine to her feet. They went inside together, his arm supporting her, her hand resting in the crook of his elbow, two halves of one whole. The years that followed were gentle ones. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw James become a respected physician, Ruth's horse breeding operation flourish, Samuel train a new generation of herbalists. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays, births and weddings, all the markers of a full life. Gideon's health began to fail first. A lifetime of hard work caught up with him, leaving him breathless and weak. Josephine tended him with the same care she had shown that first time, administering medicines and comfort, sitting by his bedside through difficult nights. "You are still saving my life," he said one evening, his voice thin but his eyes bright with love. "As many times as it takes," she replied, smoothing his silver hair back from his forehead. "I am not afraid of dying, you know. I have had a good life, better than I ever deserved. My only regret is leaving you." "Do not talk like that. You are not leaving yet." But they both knew the truth. Time was running out. On a spring morning, with sunshine pouring through the windows and the scent of herbs from the garden drifting on the breeze, Gideon Quinn died peacefully in his sleep. Josephine was beside him, holding his hand, and though her heart broke with the loss, she was grateful he had not suffered, that he had slipped away quietly into whatever came next. The funeral brought people from all over the territory, testament to the life Gideon had lived and the respect he had earned. Josephine stood dry-eyed through the service, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace. But at night, alone in the bed they had shared for 40 years, she wept. For the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. For all the tomorrows they would not share. For the simple, everyday intimacy of morning coffee and evening conversations gone forever. She was 70 years old and alone again, and the loneliness was crushing. Her children urged her to come live with one of them, but Josephine refused. This was her home, the place she and Gideon had built together. She would not leave it. Instead, she poured herself into the journal she had started years ago at Gideon's request. She filled page after page with memories, with all the things she wanted to remember, all the moments that had made their life together so rich. Writing became her solace, a way of keeping Gideon close even in death. One afternoon, Ruth found her crying over the journal and sat down beside her mother. "Tell me about Father," she said softly. So Josephine told the story again, about the wounded cowboy and the lonely herbalist, about how they had saved each other and built a life from nothing but hope and determination and love. Ruth listened, tears streaming down her own face, and when Josephine finished, she hugged her mother tight. "You had something special," Ruth said. "Not everyone gets that." "No," Josephine agreed. "I was incredibly lucky. He loved you so much. Everyone could see it, the way he looked at you, the way he always put you first. I loved him just as much, still do." "I know, Mama." Josephine lived another 5 years after Gideon's death. Quiet years spent tending her garden, playing with her growing number of great-grandchildren, and completing the journal that had become her life's work. She filled it with remedies and stories, practical wisdom and personal history, creating something that would outlast her, that would preserve the knowledge and the love story for generations to come. On her last day, she called her children to her bedside. Samuel read to her from the journal the story of how she and Gideon had met and fallen in love. James held one hand, Ruth the other, and around them gathered the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the living proof of what she and Gideon had created. "I am ready," she told them as evening fell. "Your father is waiting for me, and I have been without him long enough." She died that night, peacefully, surrounded by love, her long and remarkable life coming to a gentle close. They buried her beside Gideon under the cottonwoods, near the spot where the cabin had stood. Her children had the journal published, and it became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations. People throughout New Mexico Territory continued to use the remedies Josephine had perfected, and her great-great-grandchildren still told the story of how a lonely herbalist had saved a wounded cowboy's life and found her own salvation in the process. It was a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places, that hope could flourish even in the harshest landscapes, and that choosing love every day could transform two lonely people into something extraordinary. The land where the cabin once stood eventually became a park, preserved as a historical site. The greenhouse still stood, maintained by Josephine's descendants, and visitors could walk through it and see the herbs she had planted over a century before. A plaque told the basic facts of her life, but the real story, the heartfelt, complicated, beautiful truth of it, lived in that journal and in the memories passed down through her family. Two people who should have been strangers, connected by a bullet wound and a lonely woman's compassion, had created a legacy that endured long after they were gone. They had chosen each other against all odds, had built a life from nothing, and had loved each other fiercely and faithfully until death and beyond. It was exactly the kind of love story that deserved to be remembered, treasured, and celebrated for generations to come.